In this special update episode, we discuss the breaking news revolving around a case we covered less than a month ago, episode 232, the murder of Little Christmas Doe. In December of 1988, a truck driver discovered the secured and concealed remains of an unidentified child at an illegal dump site in rural Ware County, Georgia. Investigators at the time worked to the best of their abilities to identify the child in hopes of finding her killer or killers. Despite their sincerest efforts, the case would grow cold. However, no one ever forgot that little girl, nor gave up hope that someday they would find her name. Now, nearly 35 years to the day, she has been positively identified as 5-year-old Kenyatta Odom of Albany, Georgia. Not only has she been identified, but 2 suspects have also been arrested and charged with her murder. This is Trace Evidence special update episode, Little Christmas Doe Identified. Welcome to Trace Evidence. I'm your host, Stephen Pacheco. Today we examine the breaking news regarding both the confirmed identity of 5-year-old Kenyatta Odom and the arrest of 2 suspects in her murder. After a quick recap, we'll dive right into that new information. So, without further ado, this is a special update episode, Little Christmas Doe Identified. Four days before Christmas, on December 21st, 1988, a truck driver passing through rural Ware County, Georgia, made a heartbreaking and horrifying discovery. While that day had begun with fresh reminders of winter's cold snap, the arrival of afternoon elevated temperatures into the mid-70s, ushering in the shedding of jackets and coats. One man squirming out of his hoodie that morning was rolling eastward on U.S. Route 82, passing through Albany, Tifton, and Pearson. This would lead him into a long rural stretch of Ware County with few places to stop or businesses to visit. For him, that quickly became a problem, as he later reported to police that he desperately needed to use the bathroom. Swinging a left turn, he moved north off US 82 in the very small community of Millwood. His truck kicked up a massive wall of dust as he proceeded onto poorly maintained dirt roads, which carried him up into the wilderness. He was seeking a private area to relieve himself and found it at an illegal dumping ground not far from the intersection of Duncan Bridge and Forks Roads. Jumping down from his vehicle, the man took care of his business and soon found his attention captured by a pile of junk in a makeshift garbage dump. One item that really stood out to him was an old television console jutting out from the refuse in a dusty little turnaround. Walking around the console, the man noticed that someone had nailed several boards of wood to the side, perhaps in a half-assed attempt to repair it. For whatever reason, the driver kicked the object over, knocking it onto its side, at which time one of the wooden boards split and fell off. Peering into the opening, the driver saw an object that didn't quite look like it belonged inside of the console. Prying off more boards, the man grabbed and pulled free what seemed to be a metal trunk or footlocker. The locker was sealed shut by what appeared to be concrete, and while the driver fumbled around with it, he managed to crack the lid open a bit. Now more curious about this odd object, the driver began examining it from all angles when his heart caught in his throat as he saw the fingers of what appeared to be a small child reaching out from within that cement blob. Investigators arriving on the scene would describe it in disturbing detail. The metal footlocker had not only been filled with concrete, but almost an entire roll of duct tape was used to wrap around it again and again until it was difficult to tell what was beneath. The entire locker had also been placed inside of a thick plastic bag. Prying open the box as gently as they could, investigators would find a duffel bag inside, which had also been filled with concrete. Inside of the duffel bag was a small brown blanket wrapped around the body of a young black child. Her black hair was pulled back into a ponytail secured on top of her head with a brown rubber band. She also had multicolored ribbons in her hair. She was found dressed in a white knit pullover shirt with a red pony emblem on the upper left section of the chest. She also wore white thermal pajama bottoms with maroon trim, elastic ankles, and a disposable diaper. While there was no way to be sure of age at the time, Detective Heron, one of the first on the scene, believed the child to have been no more than 3 or 4 years old. What caught him most sharply, besides the tragic and cruel nature of how she had been found, was the juxtaposition of the situation. The child appeared to have been well cared for in life. She showed no signs that she had been physically abused or mistreated. She didn't appear to have been malnourished or neglected, and Detective Heron noted that somebody had obviously taken the time to get her done up, as he noted that she looked like she could have been on her way to church or a nice event. The medical examiner noted that they could find nothing to indicate a cause of death. The level of decomposition made the examination difficult, but the coroner reported no outward signs of physical trauma, no broken bones, knife, or gunshot wounds. They estimated that the child had likely been dead for at least a month and possibly as long as 2 months. They placed her age at approximately 3 years old and, given the time of death, theorized that she had been born sometime in 1985 or late 1984. There was, of course, one major problem. They could find no records within the entire state of Georgia of any missing children who fit her description. This led them to wonder whether she had even been reported or if perhaps a parent or guardian might be responsible for the crime. Despite their efforts, law enforcement were unable to locate anyone in the area who had any knowledge of the child or how she came to be in that terrible position. While media coverage was broad and far-reaching, the case began growing cold. Over the years, many different investigators would try their hand at it, but their investigations always seemed to lead to the same dead ends. It was determined by investigators that until they could discover the child's identity, the search for her killer would have to take a back seat, and for decades, that's exactly where it stayed. In 2009, 21 years after the discovery of her body, the GBI received an anonymous tip from someone who claimed to possess knowledge about who the victim might be. According to GBI Special Agent Russell Mansfield, the tipster informed investigators that the child may have originally been from the area of Albany, Georgia. In addition, the tip stated the child may have been named Bridget, and her family at one time may have lived in Tifton. This caught investigators' attention for a number of reasons. Firstly, Albany is located approximately 94 miles west of Millwood, directly along Route 82, and Tifton is located almost in the middle of these two locations, being 53 miles west from Millwood along Route 82. Someone could easily leave Albany, travel 2 hours to Millwood, dump the body, and be back in Albany 2 hours later, without having to spend more than 10 minutes on roads other than Route 82. Another reason this piqued the curiosity of investigators was because of a newspaper recovered from the scene that originated in Albany. 12 years later, in 2021, investigators announced that they would be utilizing DNA to try and find the child's identity through the use of genetic genealogy. For the most part, it appeared that had also led them to dead ends, as GBI Special Agent Jason Sechrist noted that the DNA pointed them towards Albany, partially confirming the 2009 tip, but little else had been learned. Agent Sechrist implied that the DNA had hit relatives, but they weren't immediate to the victim, and they had a lot of backtracking to do. So much backtracking, in fact, that it could take them years, and even then, they still might not find the answers they sought. However, as of yesterday, their hopes for a quick return have now come to fruition. Case update. On Monday, November 13th, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation held a press conference in which they announced that not only had they identified Little Christmas Doe, They had also identified and arrested those believed to be her killers. The child was positively identified as 5-year-old Kenyatta Odom of Albany, Georgia. Kenyatta, or Kiki as she was known, mysteriously disappeared sometime before the body of Christmas Doe was found. At the time, Kenyatta's mother apparently explained away the disappearance by telling friends and family that the child had gone to live with her biological father. Reportedly, at the time, people accepted this story. However, over the passage of years and then decades without ever seeing or hearing about the child, they began to have their doubts about the veracity of this story. According to the GBI, while DNA and genetic genealogy were utilized to help find Kenyatta's true identity, they were not ultimately the methods which led to her real name being discovered. Instead, they ran into dead ends when they found proof that extended family members of the victim had lived in the Albany area, but they didn't discover the identity of a direct parent. Instead, the most helpful information would be delivered to investigators via a telephone tip. In December of 2022, just last year, the GBI was involved in a newspaper story discussing the case and where it stood at the time. The story garnered a lot of coverage and was ultimately read by an unnamed female. Upon hearing the story and comparing it to the details of a child's disappearance decades earlier, she reached out to the GBI. Without her call, this case may not have ever been solved, and if it was, it certainly would not have been solved now. I'll now play for you a piece of the press conference during which time GBI Special Agent Jason Seacrest explains when they started looking at DNA, where the process took them, and how the tipster managed to break the case open for them.
It wasn't until 2019 that a Region 4 agent began looking at DNA genome sequencing as a possibility for helping us identify this baby Jane Doe. In 2022, using information that had been obtained from genealogy research based on DNA results, we were able to confirm a family connection in Albany, Georgia. At that point, we began comparing DNA from family members in that family tree to the extract of DNA from the baby Jane Doe. We moved on to December of 2022, on the anniversary date of when baby Jane Doe was found. We did a news release through the media, and a tipster called forward. She had heard the story of baby Jane Doe, and she believed she may know who this little girl may be. She knew that there had been a child that had gone missing, and that her mother said that the child had gone to live with her father. This person never really believed that story and found that it just didn't believe it was true. We investigated this lead. In collaboration with the Ware County Sheriff's Office, we began tracking down that specific family tree, and that investigation led us to today.
As always, it appears there are people out there who know what happened or have a high level of suspicion about what they've been told. And I think it's exceedingly important to highlight that even after 30 years, law enforcement was still highly dependent upon information given to them by a tipster. Who knows where this case might be if that woman hadn't picked up the phone and shared what she believed. While the GBI was able to positively identify the child in June of this year, they had more work to do to begin making arrests. That leads us to this month when, on Thursday, November 9th, Kenyatta's biological mother, 56-year-old Evelyn Odom, was located and arrested in Cook County, some 70 miles west of Ware County and approximately halfway between Millwood and Albany. The Lenox Police Department, in conjunction with the Cook County Sheriff's Department, received arrest warrants and were able to take Odom in without incident. In addition to Kenyatta's mother, police have also arrested 61-year-old Ulyster Sanders Sr. out of Dougherty County, which is home to the city of Albany. While unassociated with Evelyn today, back in 1988, he was her live-in boyfriend, and it's believed by investigators that he was directly involved with both the murder and disposal of Kenyatta's remains. As it turns out, That newspaper from Albany, which could easily have been overlooked by investigators, was a major clue in this case. District Attorney Greg Edwards is very confident in the evidence they possess, telling CBS News, quote, "We believe that there is evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that will lead to justice being found for Kenyatta." End quote. I will now play some audio for you from the GBI press conference of Agent Sechrist discussing these arrests.
The investigation didn't stop there. Since this summer, we have continued to conduct interviews and other investigative acts to try to determine what caused the death of Kenyatta Odom. Based on that investigation, on November 1st, we were able to secure a true bill on a grand jury indictment for Kenyatta's mother, Evelyn Odom, also known as Zemeka Luciano, and Evelyn's live-in boyfriend at the time, Ulyster Sanders Sr. Both Evelyn and Ulyster were charged with 5 counts, 1 of felony murder, 1 of cruelty to children in the first degree, 1 of aggravated battery family violence, 1 count of concealing the death of another person, and 1 count of conspiracy to conceal the death of another person. Both Evelyn and Ulyster were arrested without incident on Thursday, November 9th, 2023. Finally, after almost 35 years, not only were we able to identify her remains of who baby Jane Doe was, but we were also able to make the arrest of those that we believe were responsible.
While there is no statute of limitation in regard to murder, reporters at the press conference asked how they would apply to the other charges the suspects are facing. Typically, cruelty and aggravated battery have 4-year limitations in the state of Georgia, while concealing a death and conspiracy to conceal a death have 2-year limitations. However, the indictments specify that in the Georgia law code, those statutes were tolled. Essentially, they were frozen and did not start running towards their limitations because the suspects were not at the time identified. How that will stand up in court remains to be seen, but the murder charges themselves should be airtight. The indictment goes on to state that Kenyatta lived at the home occupied by Odom and Sanders, and it's believed that is where she was killed. Without going too deep into disturbing details, the indictment also states that Odom and Sanders submerged the 5-year-old child in hot water, which seriously scalded and disfigured her legs and feet, leading to her death. Simultaneous to this statement, Agent Sechrist noted that the original medical examiner labeled the crime as homicide by unknown causes, and that is unlikely to change, though the investigation is not yet finished. It was theorized that Kenyatta may have died as many as 5 months prior to her discovery in that little garbage dump in rural Ware County. This is where the case remains for now. The monsters responsible for this horrifying and hideous crime are in custody, and while nearly 4 decades have passed, they can no longer escape the hands of justice. And I truly hope that, if found guilty, they throw the fucking book at them. They should never have an opportunity to set foot outside as free persons and should be denied all aspects of life that they stole from little Kenyatta. I try to look on the bright side and acknowledge that she has her name back, that the guilty are in custody, but that does little to assuage the painful nightmare she had to endure in the final hours of her life and God knows what prior to that. As always, I will keep up with the case, and when new information is released, I'll put together another update. Not all stories can have happy endings, and in this world, most of them don't. But there is some solace to be found in knowing that law enforcement never gave up on finding her name, and I hope for years to come, Kenyatta is warmly remembered, while Odom and Sanders are forgotten in small, dark cells. While Kenyatta Odom has had her name returned to her, and those responsible for this atrocious crime have been arrested and will hopefully face the full force of the justice system, there are still questions to be answered. If you have any information about either of the suspects or Kenyatta herself, which you believe could assist investigators, please contact the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's 24-hour communications center at 404-244-2600. You can also submit information through their website at gbi.georgia.gov. I know they are also currently trying to determine the identity and whereabouts of Kenyatta's biological father. I'd like to take a moment to issue a special thank you as well to Laura Norton. Many of you may know her as the voice of the podcast The Fall Line and One Strange Thing. This was a case that was very close to her heart, and she provided me with helpful information regarding the case, the investigation, and she was the one who broke the news to me that Kenyatta had been identified. She recently released the book Lay Them to Rest, which is focused on forensic science and unidentified persons, which I highly recommend you check out. I'll provide a link in the show notes. Also, a massive thank you to all of you out there listening. You made this episode explode, and it received many more downloads than an average episode does. With listeners and supporters like all of you, who knows what answers we might find next. At this time, I'd like to take a moment to thank some of our amazing Patreon producers. Andrew Guarino, Ann Bertram, Camelia Tyler, Christine Greco, Danny Renee, Denise Dingsdale, Desiree Lauro, Donna Buttram, Deani Dyson, Guillerme Pinto, Jennifer Winkler, Justin Snyder, Kara Moreland, KY, Kelly Michelle, Lars Jensen Fangel, Leslie B., Lisa Hobson, Madison Lahoulier, Melissa Breckeisen, Nick Mohar Schurz, Stacy Finnegan, Stephanie Joyner, and Tom Radford. I can't begin to express just how much all of your support means to me, as without all of you, trace evidence would not be possible. If you're interested in learning more about this case or other cases featured on the show, please visit trace-evidence.com. There you can find case breakdowns, all social media links, merchandise shops, case descriptions, media, and options for donating, including PayPal and Patreon, should you wish to support the show. For now, this concludes the update of the murder of Kenyatta Odom. Hopefully, there will be some more news to share in the future, including the conviction of the horrible, inhuman creatures who tortured and stole away the life of a 5-year-old child. How a mother could ever do things like this will forever haunt me, and how the innocent lives of children are so often taken by those entrusted to protect them is an affront against nature itself. I want to thank you all for listening, and just a reminder, episode 234 will be dropping later this week, in which I'll touch on another unsolved case. So again, thank you all for listening.